Restealing. When I talk about restealing, I mean 30 big blinds and less. We only take very profitable rejams. Marginal rejams, we either flat call, fold, or 3-bet fold. Yes, you can even 3-bet fold with 20 big blinds, but this is not part of this video here. Just as a side note, you can definitely have a 3-bet fold range with 20 big blinds. So if you have a hand that is a marginal rejam, you rather want to take the option of flat calling, folding, or 3-bet folding. Depends on obviously which position you are. If you're in the big blind, flat calling is probably the best option instead of rejamming. If you're in the small blind, it's either 3-bet or fold. If you're on the button, it's probably also flat call or fold because you're in position, you can flat call. Rejam ranges are constructed based on proper open raise frequencies. What does it mean? All the rejam ranges I have constructed for you and put into PDF files are based on proper open raise frequency. So I assume the opponents are open raising somewhat of like proper open raise frequencies. So if you have an opponent, let's say, that is opening 60% from the button, you can rejam even looser. So here I assume the opponents are open raising somewhere between like around 44%. From MP around 22%, hijack 22%, cutoff 30%, and so on and so forth. So if you have an opponent where you have a fairly large sample size on him and he is deviating from these numbers, you should also make adjustments. But how to make adjustments, how to learn restealing, how to also learn it a little bit by heart, those ranges, I will talk about that at the end of the video when it's also time for taking action, and I will give you your homework. Based on that, I want to show you how you can learn restealing, how you get a feeling for that, and when you know, okay, it's time to make an adjustment, it's time to pull the trigger and rejam fairly loose, or when it's time to knit around and make really good folds, even though in general you would have rejam certain hands. Here's some rules for restealing. Follow them 100% no matter what. Deuces to nines are very profitable rejams versus hijack, cutoff, button, small blinds with 30 big blinds and less from small blind, big blind, and even from the button. So if you're button against cutoff, you have less than 30 big blinds. Pocket pairs are always very profitable rejams. Obviously, you should, if you have 30 big blinds, you should 3-bet a hand like tens, jacks, queens, kings, and aces, and ace king. So here I'm just basically show you what kind of hands you could potentially rejam. So especially hands like 4s, 5s, button versus cutoff, button versus cutoff, big blind versus hijack. You don't want to just flat, just rejam. The EV it's very, very profitable. Obviously, flat call is also decent, but since you're not so deep anymore, you want to rather take your forward equity. And if your opponent calls, very often you're flipping against ace king, ace queen, ace jack, maybe even king queen suited. So you have decent equity. If you have an offsuited ace, it's always very profitable to rejam big blind versus button for less than 12, 20 big blinds. So if you have ace deuce offsuited, and you are in the big blind and you face an open raise, you should just go all in. In order to prove you what I'm talking about, yes, I'm under the gun, but let's assume here we're talking about the situation, the button open raise, and here the big blind rejams. Yes, he has 23 big blinds, but let's assume he has around 4,000 chips, so around 20 big blinds. So what I did here is I copy pasted the hand history into Hold'em Resource Calculator, and I changed the stack size for the big blind. I gave him 3,900 chips, so he has 19.5 big blinds. I put the button on a raising range around 40% of his hands, maybe even a bit tighter, maybe even a bit looser. But this is not part of the discussion here. I'm also going to show you how you can adjust those ranges and what you do in marginal situations. So here he's opening around 40%, and then for the situation that the big blind, you see the player here in this column, is rejamming, we're gonna also design button's calling range. For 20 big blinds, this is already a fairly loose range. So I'm basically assuming the worst case scenario. So I want to get the range, which is basically, yeah, basically the worst possible range I should rejam, assuming that my opponent might call a bit too loose. And then you can see that a hand like ace deuce off is very, very profitable. And I highly doubt that you will reach a higher AV by just flat calling. Ace deuce off plays horrible post flop, especially 20 big blinds. We have to give up on so many board textures, and if we hit our ace, we're going to be dominated very often. So here we just take the fold equity, and as you can see, he's opening 40% of the time, and he's calling 20% of the time. So 50% of the time, we're going to take down the pot right away. So even though we have only 50% fold equity, ace deuce offsuit is already very profitable. Now we're assuming he might not call so loose, so he makes some, which I think is a little bit more reasonable. You see ace deuce off is even profitable, and you can actually see how wide you could potentially rejam. The problem here is that the button should adjust and open raise a bit tighter, especially when he's opening into 220 big blind stack. And this is something people rarely do. They're not able to adapt on those shorter stack size. And this is something I have learned in sit and goes, that when you're playing against 20 to 25, 30 big blind stacks, you shouldn't open raise that much on the button, because they could potentially punish you with a lot of rejams. And you have to call it off very loose. But do you really want to raise call king 7 suited for 20 big blinds? I highly doubt that. That means button should start limping a few more hands. And if he wants to keep playing his 40-45% range, he should start limping. Or he gets tighter, maybe raise on 35%, 32%, and then small blind and big blind cannot rejam that wide anymore. The question though is, even though 10-8 off, or let's say 9-6 off might be a very quite profitable rejam, maybe even flatter has a higher AV. This is something that is really hard to distinguish and also to determine, because there are so many factors we need to consider in order to estimate the EV of flat calling and playing the hand post flop that we can just roughly guess. A very good rule of thumb is everything that is over 0.75 here in this scenario, I would rejam. Then I'm on the safe side and I know it's very profitable. And this is already quite pessimistic assumption here that he's opening 39%. I mean, some players are a bit looser, some are, but in general, people at least open raise here 39%. I highly doubt that people ever fold a hand like 8-6 suited here from the button. I mean, they're already folding some suited queens. They might fold some more of those off-suited hands here, but in general, it doesn't change that much. Ace deuce offsuit remains a quite profitable rejam here. And especially when you get shorter, like 17, 16 BB, those rejams become even better, because then additionally, also our equity when called increases a bit, because our opponent starts raise calling king queen, king queen off, king queen suited, king jack suited, maybe a hand like queen jack suited. Yet we still have, and we also additionally don't need that much fold equity anymore, because we are risking less. Let's say we're rejamming for 12 big blinds, we might only need 30% fold equity. With 20 big blinds, as you just saw, we need around 50% fold equity in order to have a very proper rejam with ace deuce off. But most of the time, I would say, I'm pretty sure I can say every single time we have a very rejam with ace deuce off. Especially if you play against regulars who are very sticky and they open raise, let's say, more than even 40% in these situations, then it's just literally printing. And those are the situations where you want to adapt and rejam fairly loose. Same applies, by the way, for the small blind. I mean, here, the calling range for the button is still fairly loose. Also make sure that you adjust over calling ranges. So button raise, 3-bet jam, small blind, big blinds over calling range. And this is obviously very, very unrealistic. So big blinds over calling range is maybe something like this, still quite loose. I highly doubt that he's ever over calling ace 10 suited. Nevertheless, also you can see small blind can rejam loose. He has to rejam a bit tighter because there's still one player left to act who can additionally wake up with a hand. And this is going to happen around 7% of the time. That impacts obviously our small blind rejam range. Don't worry if you just started working with RJC. Download it, get used to it, Google for YouTube tutorials. There's so many videos how to use it, especially for beginners, and it's very, very powerful. Icy Miser is a little bit more appealing. It doesn't look so simple, so wide. It's a little bit more colorful. It's a little bit more intuitive. It's a little bit more customer friendly in my opinion. But I'm used to RJC. It's also very, very powerful. So they are both basically similar in terms of what they deliver. All right. Suited aces are always very profitable for even 20 to 25 big blinds. Out of position, we always rejam ace king off for 30 big blinds and less. Ace king suited, we 3-bet for 25 and 30 big blinds. Ace king off obviously has less equity, needs a little bit more protection. You can also rejam ace king suited for 25, 30 big blinds. That is a spot where I would say, if you feel very, very unconfident playing ace king with such a stack size out of position, then go for the rejam. But for 30 big blinds and less, you really want to just strip it in. Rejamming versus 2. Okay, here it gets a little bit tricky, but just a little bit. If the effective stack size between villain 1 and villain 2 is more than 40 big blinds, rejam tighter. With 40 big blinds and more, villain 2, so the flat caller, might also flat call hands like 8s, 9s, 10s, jacks, and ace queen. And those hands, or ace jack suited, and even maybe some traps like aces and a few combos kings, definitely possible in these days. And those hands he's snap calling against our rejam or resteal. Rejam, resteal, it's the same. Sometimes I use rejamming, sometimes I use restealing, so don't get confused. Oh, 1 second, I'm gonna show you a hand. Here we go. So ace 10 suited, here we have an open raise, and now a 12 big blind stack flat calls. So the question is, how do we treat it? Yes, he can have like aces and kings, so he's trapping here and there, but it's very unlikely. It's the likelihood of him getting aces or kings getting dealt is around 1%. So it's not very likely. It's more likely that he has a hand like king 10 suited, queen jack suited, jack 10 suited, 10 9 suited, maybe something like ace 5, ace 9 suited, king jack off. So hence he's not, especially weaker opponents, recreational players, weaker recs, they're not really sure what to rejam or rather what to resteal. So then they want to be on the safe side and they're flatting those hands. He's not having ace king for sure. He's not having ace queen. He's not having queens. He's not having jacks, 10s, 9s, and 8s. Yet, let's say they're both deeper and open raise and call from more earlier positions. So they're around 50 big blinds and I have 20 big blinds. They can easily have ace queen. They can easily have, the flat caller have jacks, 10s, 9s, and 8s. So then the situation changes a bit and we're basically just rejamming our quote-unquote value range. So ace 10 suited would be the bottom, maybe king queen suited, ace jack off, pocket 8s and better. Everything else I would fold because besides the initial raiser can call us off, also there's additional likelihood that the flat caller is calling it off with his ace queen and maybe even sometimes ace king when he wants to play it more safe and not 3-bet being so deep. So then he can have sometimes ace king, he can definitely have all the ace queens, ace jacks, pocket 10s, pocket 9s, pocket 8s, even pocket 7s. If he puts us on any pair, people just call it off with pocket 7s. So then your fold equity decreases, hence your hand strengths should increase and you should rejam just very strong holdings. Here, nevertheless, I would rejam any pair. I would also rejam hands like king jack suited, hands like king queen off. I would also rejam a hand like ace 9 suited, ace 10 off because I basically treat the cutoff as additional dead money So I get a better price here on my rejam. Ace-10 suited here in this very situation is a fist pump rejam. But also if I have pocket deuces, if I have pocket fives, if I have king jack, maybe even king 10 suited and king jack, probably not king jack off, but king 10 suited, even the suited broad race, they're very, very powerful in these situations here. So I go for the rejam and they both fold. So if someone flats with 25 big blinds, so let's say even the guy would have had around 25 big blinds, it's also very unlikely that he has ace queen, ace king, jacks, tens, nines, eights. He would rejam those hands by himself. Then it's even better because now since he is deeper, he might even have hands like 9-8 suited, ace-8 suited, king-9 suited, maybe something like 7-6 suited. So his flatting range becomes wider, and especially flat calls around 20 to 30 big blinds, you shouldn't give them so much credit, rather see it as opportunity to rejam very light and take down a bigger pot and having a better risk-reward ratio. Be more careful when your opponent has more than 40 big blinds, as I said, because then he has those holdings that can snap call against your rejam. So the later the flat caller, the more we can rejam and vice versa. Especially if someone is flatting from button cutoff, he can peel way wider, he can flat call suited aces. If someone is flatting from MP against another gun range, his range is wider.